The man, just as shocked as Madeline was, raised his hands once more and began to whimper as the woman in the corner picked the child up in her arms and screamed. The rot pulled the man into a dim corner and held him there. Her eyes and sharpened teeth seemed to glow white in the shadow of the dark room. Madeline found her voice and the movement in her hands. She pointed a revolver at the rot. "Let him go," she said, her hands shaking. She didn't know if it was due to the wound in her shoulder or having witnessed the supernatural display, but she felt dizzy and struggled to maintain her concentration. "I want to live. Why can't you understand that?" cried the rot, trembling. "The plague is what does that, isn't it? Keeps you living when by all rights you should be dead," said Madeline, taking a step to the rot. "I've never seen that before." "Come no closer, Red Crow. I've heard the stories about you. You've hunted and killed more of us than any hawk in Abberwall. Our blood rests on your head, cursed though we be," spat the rot, trembling and laughing. "I said let him go," commanded Madeline. "That's not gonna happen. I will not risk you infecting this precinct." "And what will you risk, doorbell? This innocent man's fucking head?" Madeline aimed at her, but the rot moved behind the man with a cruel laugh, holding the shotgun steady against his ear. "You see, our fates are intertwined, Red Crow," said the rot, then pointing to the odd semi-triangular tattoo on her neck. "I'll have nothing to do with you," she spatted back. "So you say, but that's not true, is it? Who can say what the future holds? The cold night is on the rise. What will you say when darkness descends upon us all?" "Abberwall will not fall." Madeline took a step to the rot, attempting to get a good angle on her. "I said stay away," she screamed. "You will let me go or this man buys it." The man looked at Madeline, and his face turned to horror as he understood the look in her eyes. There was too much at stake. "Please, don't," he pleaded. "I'm sorry," whispered Madeline. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet pierced the man's chest and hit the rot behind him. The rot screamed and pulled the trigger of the shotgun, splattering the man's skull and brain matter to the wooden floorboards. Pieces of bone and drops of blood splattered onto the woman and her child. The man's body fell, lifeless and headless, in a heap of flesh. The woman in the corner screamed again, and the rot darted to her and the child, but this time, Madeline was ready. In one swift motion, she drew the saber at her hip, the sharp steel edge gleaming, and leapt across the room. The rot turned too late as Madeline swung her saber in 3 elaborate and precise whistling strokes, piercing her flesh and slicing through bone as if it were made of paper. The rot tumbled over and fell in pieces before reaching the woman and her child. Madeline then struck the rot's spinal cord with the tip of her saber and severed her neck. Her head rolled on the floor and stopped with her white eyes staring up at Madeline. They blinked once and then remained still with a cruel smile etched on the head's deadened face. The body twitched, but did not get up again. The woman screamed again and ran to her dead husband's body. The little boy remained sitting in the corner, staring at the rot without any emotion or concern. Madeline took a deep breath of relief and led her bloodied saber to her side. In that moment, Lieutenant Elisha and the rest of her men bounded up the steps. "Order of the Hawk!" shouted Elisha. "Stand down!" "I'm here," Madeline said. A look of shock covered his face as he saw the man's body and the dead rot sprawled on the floor. "Holy shite," said Elisha. Then, looking at her shoulder, "Did the rot?" "It's only buckshot," said Madeline. "The rot never touched me." "Lieutenant, call up the Escalapian. This rot needs to be contained before it spreads the plague in Westforth Precinct. And Walnut needs to be seen as well." "Right away, sir." "You killed him!" the woman shouted at Madeline. "You horrid bitch! You killed him!" The woman sobbed and cradled the man's chest, but she didn't know how to hold his headless body. Blood covered her once blue dress. Tears fell from the woman's cheek, and a fire burned in her eyes. "You killed my poor Arthur!" "The same name as my husband." Madeline frowned and walked to the boy, who was still staring at the dead rot's cut body. "You are safe now, little one. I want it known that Captain Madeline Joanna Oldbarrow has given you permission for asylum in the Hospitalaire Quarter. You go there and tell him I gave you passage. Be sure to go to a letting before entering the quarter." "You can go plow yourself, Red Crow," spat the woman, letting go of her husband's headless body. She stormed at Madeline with fist raised, but Elisha stepped in between them, holding the crazed widow back. "I don't want your filthy handouts. Look what you've done. The plague didn't take my husband. You did. Damn you. And damn the Order of the Hawk. Everyone knows you killed more people than the plague ever did or ever will. How many more of our lives will you claim before you are satisfied? The cold night is upon us indeed, yet the real plague in Abberwall is you, paranoid bastards." Elisha slapped the woman's face hard, sending her to the ground. "Stop! Do not hurt her," ordered Madeline. "Captain?" he asked. "Get this woman and her child to a clinic. Make sure they are sent safely on their way to wherever they desire," whispered Madeline. "What will you do with him?" asked the woman, pointing to her husband. "He will be incinerated at Merkwell Bay as custom of disposing rots," responded Madeline, unable to look the woman in her eye. "You whore," said the woman. She tried to say more, but Madeline couldn't tell between her sobs and unintelligible mumbling. Elisha turned the newly made widow around and pushed her towards the stairs. Suddenly, the fight in her died, and she allowed herself to be led away meekly, like a lamb. "She's in shock. Make sure the Esculapian inspects her," said Madeline, clearing her throat. She looked back at the boy. He was staring up at her. Without saying a word, the little boy stood up and walked past them to follow his mother. "What shall I put in the report, sir?" asked Elijah, raising one eyebrow. "This was a necessary death. Had the rot been given the chance to get away, we might have lost this precinct," said Madeline, inspecting her wounded shoulder. "I, Captain Madeline Oldbarrow, made a choice that helped preserve Wezerith, and in turn, Abberwall. Send that statement to the papers and have it printed on the morrow." "It couldn't be helped, Chevalier. You did what was best," said Elisha. Madeline stared at the body of the rot lying in bloody pieces beside the dead man. "The rot called me Doorbell." "Doorbell?" Elisha glanced at the carnage. "What kind of name is that?" "Back then, the children of the academy used it as a nickname when they tried to get a rise out of me. It's another way of saying teacher. That or nincompoop." "How would the rot know that? Perhaps she was one of your students?" "She's the right age," whispered Madeline. The Esculapian had arrived. He was thin and wore a tar-black trench coat and had a beak-like silver gas mask, moving like a phantom into the room, barely making any noise. He began to clean up the blood on the floor with a bucket of strong cleanser and a hand brush. The cleansing chemicals emitted a nearly blinding odor that burned the nostrils. Madeline hushed her voice as she leaned in to her lieutenant. "I think you and I have a bigger job to complete, Mr. Abnett. For example, how did this rot enter our precinct? Do you know what could happen if the plague was found here?" asked Madeline. Elisha's bushy white eyebrows flew up. "We could lose Westfirth." "Westfirth, the last precinct," said Madeline. She closed her eyes and rubbed the tingling feeling on her neck. "Abberwall would be completely damned then. I will not let that happen." "Aye, sir," said Elisha, bowing his head. "I don't understand how she made it through, however. Our walls are reinforced and manned every hour on the hour. Our sewers are blocked completely. I don't see any wings on her, so I know she didn't fall from the sky. Do you think maybe she succumbed to the rot inside the precinct?" Madeline shook her head. "It was impossible to come from within, wasn't it?" "I want the rot's body stitched and brought to the morgue for further inspection," said Madeline. "Write the report. I have a letting appointment." "Oh?" asked Elisha. "That's right. Even the Red Crow must have blood drawn."